It's 2:47 in the morning. You are awake. Your eyes are open and your brain is spinning, and somewhere in the darkness, your phone is charging on the nightstand. Its screen black and silent. You think you are broken. You think your sleep is ruined. You think the 8-hour block you were promised by every health article and mattress commercial has shattered into pieces, and now you are lying here in the wreckage. But what if I told you that waking up in the middle of the night is not a malfunction at all? What if your body is doing exactly what it was built to do? What if the only thing that changed was the world around you? For most of human history, sleep did not look like a solid 8-hour slab. It looked like two chunks with a gap in the middle. Historian A. Roger Ekirch spent 20 years combing through diaries, court records, medical manuals, and literature from before the Industrial Revolution, and he found something buried in the language that almost everyone had missed. People didn't just sleep. They had a first sleep and a second sleep. In Old English, the term was first to sleep. In French, it was premier sommeil. In Italian, primo sonno. These weren't poetic flourishes. They were functional descriptions of a biological rhythm that dominated human life for thousands of years. You would go to bed shortly after sunset. You would sleep for roughly 4 hours. Then you would wake up. And for an hour or two, you would exist in a state that was neither fully awake nor fully asleep. You might stoke the fire. You might lie still and think. You might talk to the person beside you. In some cultures, this was the preferred time for conception. In others, it was a window for prayer, for reflection, for quiet labor. Then you would drift back into your second sleep and remain there until dawn. This wasn't insomnia. This was the architecture your brain evolved to expect. Ekirch's research, published in his book At Day's Close, Night and Times Past, revealed over 500 references to segmented sleep across European historical documents alone. These references appeared in everything from Homer's Odyssey to the Canterbury Tales to 16th century French physician manuals. A 15th century English prayer manual explicitly advised people to meditate on their sins during the wakeful period between sleeps. A French doctor from the 1500s wrote that laborers who engaged in heavy work often had their most productive thoughts during this middle-of-the-night interval. Doctors of the era even recommended specific activities for the watch hour: reading, meditation, light conversation. They understood that the brain in this intermediate state was softer, more porous, more capable of insight. It was a feature of human biology, not a bug. But where did it come from? To understand that, you have to look at the people who never left the ancient blueprint. In 2015, sleep researcher Jerry Siegel at the University of California, Los Angeles, did something no one had done before at this scale. He traveled to Tanzania, Namibia, and Bolivia, and placed wristwatch-sized actigraphy devices on members of 3 hunter-gatherer groups: the Hadza in Tanzania, the San in Namibia, and the Simene in Bolivia. These are among the last remaining populations whose sleep patterns have not been reshaped by electric light, alarm clocks, or 9-to-5 schedules. Siegel expected to find people sleeping more than modern humans. He found the opposite. They slept less. On average, they slept about 6.5 hours per night. But here is the part that matters. They almost never woke up in the middle of the night and stared at the ceiling in panic. They fell asleep quickly. They stayed asleep. And when the sun rose, they woke up without grogginess. The reason wasn't magic. It was light. Or more precisely, it was the absence of light after sunset and the presence of light at dawn. Their bodies lived in sync with the sun. And because they were physically active during the day, their bodies were genuinely tired when night came. But Siegel noticed something else that his data quietly revealed. Even in these groups, sleep wasn't always continuous. There were nights when people woke up. They sat by the fire, they talked, they listened, and then they went back to sleep. The gap was still there. It was just smaller, and it wasn't feared. It was woven into the fabric of the night. This wasn't just a historical curiosity. In 1992, psychiatrist Thomas Weir at the National Institute of Mental Health conducted an experiment that would never pass a modern ethics board for inconvenience alone. He placed healthy adults in an environment with 14 hours of complete darkness every night for a month. At first, they slept for long stretches, but by the fourth week, something remarkable happened. Their sleep split in two. They slept for about 4 hours, woke for 1 to 2 hours in a state of calm alertness, and then slept again for another 4 hours. They had rediscovered first and second sleep, not because they were told to, because their biology, freed from electric light, simply returned to its default setting. Your ancestors lived in a world where the night was long and dark and full of sound. The sky was not orange from streetlights. It was a deep black carpet scattered with stars that seemed close enough to touch. The fire was the only light source, and it cast dancing shadows on the walls of the cave or the shelter. The air smelled of wood smoke and earth. The only clock was the moon. The only boundary between you and the wild was a wall of sticks or stone and a fire that needed tending. Predators moved in the blackness beyond the firelight. Wolves howled. The temperature dropped. Someone had to stay awake and listen. Anthropological evidence suggests that human sleep in prehistory was likely polyphasic or biphasic, not just by preference but by necessity. The fire was small, the shelter was cramped, the group was vulnerable, so sleep rotated. Some slept while others watched. And in the gaps between sleep chunks, the brain did something extraordinary. It entered a state of quiet wakefulness that modern researchers are only beginning to map. During this middle-of-the-night interval, prolactin levels rise. Prolactin is a hormone that promotes calm and a meditative mental state. In ancient humans, this hormonal surge may have created a natural window for reflection, creativity, and social bonding. You weren't supposed to be unconscious for 8 straight hours. You were supposed to dip into consciousness, process the day, connect with others, and then descend again. This is why so many historical accounts describe vivid dreams, spiritual visions, and creative insights during the watch hour. It wasn't a glitch. It was a feature. Then the light came, not firelight. Something colder and brighter. In the late 19th century, gas lamps began to flood city streets. Then electricity arrived, and suddenly the night was optional. Factories could run around the clock. People could stay awake past sunset without effort. And the medical establishment, seeing this new potential for productivity, began to reframe sleep as a problem to be solved rather than a rhythm to be honored. Doctors in the 1800s began to describe the gap between first and second sleep as a disorder. They called it insomnia. They prescribed opium. They built an entire industry around the idea that a healthy person should sleep in one uninterrupted block. And slowly, the language changed. First sleep and second sleep disappeared from common vocabulary. By the early 20th century, most people had never heard the terms. They had been replaced by a single word: insomnia. A word that meant broken, a word that meant wrong. Today, roughly 10% of the global population meets the clinical criteria for chronic insomnia. In some developed nations, that number climbs to 30%. We have built a world where the night never truly arrives, and then we wonder why our brains cannot rest. But your brain never got the memo. It is still running the old software. It still expects darkness to be absolute. It still expects to wake up in the middle of the night and find a quiet room, a warm fire, and the option to simply exist for a while. Instead, it finds a glowing rectangle that blasts blue light directly into your eyes. Neuroscientist Russell Foster at Oxford University discovered that the human eye contains a special class of photoreceptors that have nothing to do with vision and everything to do with telling your brain what time it is. These cells are exquisitely sensitive to blue light. When you stare at a phone at 2:47 in the morning, you are not just entertaining yourself. You are sending a signal to your brain that the sun has risen. Your melatonin production crashes, your cortisol spikes, your circadian rhythm shatters, and your brain, confused and alarmed, decides that you are under threat. It finds a culture that treats nighttime wakefulness as a personal failure. It finds a body that sat in a chair all day and never got tired enough to sleep deeply. And so your brain panics. It releases more cortisol. Your heart rate rises. You check the clock and calculate how many hours remain until you have to perform again. You are not experiencing a sleep disorder. You are experiencing a mismatch between ancient biology and modern life. This is called evolutionary mismatch theory. Biologist Theodosius Dobzhansky famously said that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. But here's the darker corollary. Nothing in modern human suffering makes sense except in the light of how far we have moved from the conditions we evolved to inhabit. Your sleep is not broken. Your environment is. So what did ancient humans actually do when they couldn't sleep? They didn't try harder. They didn't count backwards from 1,000. They didn't swallow pills designed to force their brains into a factory schedule. They accepted the wakefulness. They used it. They sat by the fire and let their minds wander. They talked in low voices. They watched the stars. They let the prolactin do its work. And when their bodies were ready, they returned to sleep. Not because they had to, because the rhythm allowed it. The question is not how to sleep like a modern human. The question is how to stop fighting the ancient human inside you. Tonight, when the sun goes down, you might not flip a switch. You might let the darkness come. You might let your body remember what it already knows. And when you wake up at 2:47 in the morning, you might not think you are broken. You might think you are simply human. Tonight, when you wake up at 2:47, you will know something most people don't. You will know that your body is not broken. It is simply ancient. If this changed how you see your sleep, leave a like. It tells the algorithm that ancient wisdom still matters. Subscribe and hit the bell because your brain was built for long-form stories told by firelight, and there are more coming. The next video will arrive in your feed when the rest of the world is asleep. See you then.